Greetings, everybody. This is our audio newsletter for May of 2025, which is also our summer reading launch newsletter. We've got a lot to share with you about summer reading and some other things, but if you haven't already, go to mylibrary.us/SRA. If you're hearing this, it has begun. You can sign up for summer reading today and get started today. Even if you can't sign up today, start keeping track of how much you're reading because you can put that back in, starting with what you read today. So that's at mylibrary.us/SRA, and you'll see a link there to get signed up. So here's the first article. Summer reading is here today, right now. Let's not overdo this and write a whole long article about the history of summer reading or about how reading programs taught me to suffer through books to get pizza, a practice that's still part of my daily routine. Let's not turn this into an online recipe where I have to tell you a long story about how my great aunt's grandma met Elvis once and gave him a glass of the wasabi ginger lemonade I'm about to tell you how to make. And Elvis said, "Wow, that tastes really weird, but thanks, I guess." And my great aunt's grandma always cherished that memory. No, let's just do this. Summer reading has begun. The adventure is at hand, and if you're reading this sometime after 6 a.m., why didn't you set your alarm earlier? What are you even doing? Sign up here, mylibrary.us/SRA. You can learn a little bit more about it at the same page. Events, all of those are at this link. If you go to mylibrary.us, you'll see an events tab. Click there, and you'll be right in there. Of course, you can also come in and get logs and so on without signing up online. So if you take that path, just start keeping track of how much you read. There's a lot more to say, but I've poured myself a glass of wasabi ginger lemonade. Hey, if it's marginally tolerable for Elvis, it's good enough for me. And I'm cracking a book, no time to waste. Bye! Next, we've got Privacy and Online Safety, Volume 2, Passwords by HPLD staff. The first step to helping boost your online protection and privacy is strengthening your passwords. I know it gets frustrating creating passwords that seem to require half the alphabet, special characters, the name of your firstborn child, and a capital letter somewhere in there, but having a complex password makes it harder to hack. A password should be 16 or more characters long. The longer the password, the more difficult it is to crack using automated methods. Passphrases or random strings of numbers and letters are preferred. To make a very secure passphrase, you should use 3 to 6 random words, not a phrase that can be found easily like song lyrics or movie titles. A password should contain a combination of letters, numbers, and special characters. A password should not contain personal information like a birth date or address. This information can be found easily. Don't use anything that can be found on social media either, like the name of a child or a pet. Here are a few more ways to protect your passwords and secure your accounts. Use multi-factor authentication. Use screen locks on your devices. Don't reuse passwords, and don't use spin-offs of an old password either. Use a safe password manager or write passwords down in a notebook. Don't allow browsers to remember your password. I know this is convenient, but it makes it easier to be hacked. Once you learn of a security breach, for example, if your bank sends you a letter about a data breach, change your passwords for your accounts. Next, we've got The Bear Book is Long, but the Years Are Short by HPLD staff. I never took my daughter... What a great start there. It never took my daughter long to locate the Bear Book. Her plump little fingers would slide it off the shelf or pull it out from under a pile of stuffed animals or gather it from the basket in the living room. "Read it," she would coax, and although I would have to take a deep breath as faint ennui and parental guilt battled in my gut, her plummy toddler voice and chubby little face would get me every time. "Sure, come on, give it here." Weeks before, I had seen this book in a $2 bin, cheap, at a grocery store. I brought it home, not knowing how many times I would read it aloud and how far it would stretch my patience. Hey, I'm all for reading, but this book, multiple times a day, for weeks on end, and this was a long story as picture books go. The Bear Book became my nemesis. My eyes would glaze over, and some days it was hard to fake the enthusiasm. Sure, we read other books too, but for months this one was perpetually trending, hot, in demand in our household. She'd sit on my lap or next to me on the couch if her baby brother was in my arms, and eagerly help me open the cover. We would flip past the title page, already taped back together from several enthusiastic beginnings. I would recite the title portentously, and the story would begin. At first, she would just listen, sometimes tracing the pictures with her juicy little forefinger. Eventually, I noticed her starting to say some of the words with me. This became a little game, where I would pause at the end of a line, and she would gleefully shout the missing word. Inside the deep, dark cave, the bear snored, and "Swumbird!" Her brother would chortle and try to grab the pages if he could, and she would inform him, "Gentle baby," if he managed to get one. Okay, it was insanely cute. It all led up to the big finish where the kid in the story accidentally wakes the bear, who growls hideously, courteous of moi, which always caused my kids to shriek and giggle. All right, looking back, it wasn't so bad. I have fond memories of listening to my own mom reading bedtime stories to me and my siblings each night, with voices. And thanks to my mom's example, I was able to help my kids love reading. Reading aloud to babies and toddlers helps prepare them for reading when they enter school. It lets them hear tons of words they wouldn't normally hear in everyday conversation, activates their imaginations with new characters and places, and familiarizes them with the idea that marks on a page represent sounds in the words we speak. It can be a wonderful time to get close, to spend time cuddling and communicating and learning together. Win, win, win. And if your kids or grandkids ask you to read any book to them, even if it's the same one you read yesterday and the day before that and the day before that, you can count that as a win as well. This bear book was certainly no great piece of literature. The illustrations were nothing special. There was a reason it was in the $2 bin at the grocery store. However, before it fell out of fashion at my house, I could recite the whole thing in my sleep. Eventually, my daughter could tell it word for word in her cute little voice while pretending to read it to me. Here's the thing. At the time, I thought I would remember every word of this book for the rest of my life, but it's gone now. As I was getting ready to write this article, I realized I couldn't even remember the title. I searched fruitlessly online through dozens of children's books about bears, but no dice. I texted my kids to ask if they remembered it. My daughter barely did, and my son said, "That super vaguely rings a bell." What is not gone is the love my kids have for reading and learning. And I'm so relieved that what I remember most about that cursed bear book is how much my kids enjoyed it when I read it to them. So read to your babies, toddlers, and preschoolers often. Even when it feels like a chore, it's building special memories for you and important skills for them. When you need a break, bring them to the library and let us read to them for a while. Sign them up for 1,000 books before kindergarten and the summer reading adventure. Build up their skills and build wonderful memories together, because as the saying about young kids goes, the days are long, but the years are short. Next, we've got A Day in the Life of a Teen/Tween Librarian by Debbie Quakenbush, Librarian. Not long ago, I was serving people at the front desk, checking out books, and providing a friendly face for the library. During a brief lull, one of my younger tween patrons walked by the desk and said, "Hi, Miss Debbie." I smiled and said, "Hello, how are you today?" "Good," they replied. "Great," I said. "How's school going?" They replied with a dull voice and expression. "Okay." "Just okay," I said. "Don't you like school?" "Not really." "Are you sure? You don't have a favorite class or teacher?" They thought for a moment and mentioned the name of a teacher, and I said, "What do you like about the teacher?" "I don't know. She's all right." I replied, "She's not mean like I am, right?" And I grinned. "Something like that. See you later." They waved and headed towards the door. I said, "Bye. I'll see you next time." Some people may think I would be discouraged with this interaction. However, I have to say I was elated to have this sort of short conversation with a young person. As a tween teen services librarian, an important part of my job is to try and connect with the tweens and teens in the library. Sometimes those connections are very pleasant, sometimes less so. I consider this interaction a very pleasant and successful conversation. Just the fact that this person stopped by the front desk and said hello to me is pretty significant. It means I made myself available enough that they know who I am and that I am here to serve, and yes, discipline them and their peers while visiting the library. I think it's safe to say most individuals think of libraries in this manner. Libraries equal reading/literacy. However, there are many different forms of literacy, and one of those forms is social/emotional literacy. Social emotional literacy is the ability to recognize, understand, manage, and effectively communicate your emotions and the emotions of others. Part of my role as a librarian is to build and establish relationships with our customers. And in my case, a teen/tween librarian, an important part of my focus lies in building connections with teens and tweens. This does not mean I become best friends with them, but I try to become a known, constant presence to them inside the library. I'm here to coach them, encourage them, and give them adult support outside of their home and school environment. The library is the safe third space for tweens and teens to come and learn and grow as individuals. Sometimes that growth is smooth. Other times, it's much more challenging. Nonetheless, having a safe third space and an adult presence outside of home and school gives kids an opportunity to grow and develop interpersonal skills, emotional maturity, and responsibility. The library is a safe space for mistakes to be made that are not tied to more serious consequences that can follow kids for a long time. I consider it a great responsibility and honor to interact with the tweens and teens in my community. One of the reasons I became a librarian was because I wanted to serve the community at large. Being able to connect with our young adult and tween customers is rewarding and sometimes exasperating, but life is like that. We experience highs and lows, and teaching these kids they can survive all these different experiences and emotions and come out as stronger, well-rounded individuals makes each interaction worth my efforts. So next time you're in the library and you see some tweens and teens getting a little loud and rambunctious, and a library employee racing along to catch up with them, be grateful that those kids have the library as a space to learn and grow. Lastly, we've got our next entry in HPLD's Cult Movie Vault. HPLD Cult Movie Vault presents Armageddon. It's summer. Time for blockbusters. And what busts a block better than a giant asteroid the size of Texas headed straight for my number one favorite planet because I'd be dead without it, Earth. This is a big one for a lot of reasons, but mostly because this is the movie that I have seen the most times by far in the theater. Yes, I know many of you have probably seen a movie multiple times in theaters. Maybe you saw the Taylor Swift Eras Tour movie a couple times. Maybe you sat down and saw Titanic more than a handful of times. My total theater screenings for Armageddon is, to my recollection, 8 to 10. I don't know exactly, unfortunately. I used to save all my movie ticket stubs, but those are long gone. But suffice to say, 8 is my low end, for sure figure. Let's go back to the heady summer of 1998. Your boy is 15, scored a sweet gig at McDonald's, and that meant he had more folding money than ever before, thanks to that fat $5.15 an hour and a complete disregard for his financial future. No way, this money was going towards snacks in Columbia House Movie Club, which gave me 11 movies for a penny, which, now that I'm writing this for my job, was kind of an investment in the future. I have two things to say about working at McDonald's. One is that this was during the Beanie Baby craze, and I worked a register during one of the days when McDonald's exclusive Beanie Babies were made available. The lobby was packed the entire time, people cheering when we sold through one Beanie Baby and moved on to the next, and we kept running out of the cheapest menu items. You had to buy something in order to also purchase a Beanie Baby. First ice cream, then cookies, then the list went on. After 2 hours of nonstop commerce, I took a break, and a manager came outside and told me, "Do you know how much your register took in?" I said no, and she told me $1,300. "Do you know how far off you were?" I said no again, a little more fearful this time. 40 cents. For the epic feat, I was given a wooden token for one free meal at McDonald's. The cynic in me was already strong, and I thought I'd have been better off financially pocketing $25, which would have still been easily within the margin of error for a register that took in $1,300. But your boy is honest to a fault. Hope that those of you who purchased those Beanie Babies did in fact fund your child's college education with those rare collectibles. 2 is that McDonald's was the cleanest of 3 restaurants I worked at. One of the others was a major chain, and the third was an absolutely filthy local establishment that no longer exists, and I'll spare you the details because at this point there's no good that can come of it. Okay, one quick story. The restaurant served a sloppy Joe type of sandwich, which was basically the ground up stuff that had been sitting on the buffet past its best by time. Once, most of a ham was thrown into the garbage, and I witnessed a manager pull the ham out of the garbage, rinse a pretty big splash of ranch dressing off of it, and then put it in the pile for sloppy Joe grinding. This was the grossest thing I saw at that restaurant, but not by a wide margin. My best buddy also worked at McDonald's. Let's call him Ted, because it's a small town and his first name is unusual enough that people would probably know who I'm talking about. I'm not about to tell you that he murdered someone and hid the body or something. Just, librarians like to give people their privacy. Ted was a fun guy in a lot of ways, and he was unusual in some ways. He didn't own a pair of long pants for the duration of high school, and I saw him wear long pants once at prom after he'd attempted to locate a pair of tuxedo shorts. These didn't exist at the time, but now I see many pictures of Pharrell Happy Williams wearing them on red carpets. So maybe Ted was a maniac with no nerves in his lower legs, or maybe he was just ahead of his time. Ted was a talented artist, and in drawing class, when the teacher suggested he draw something other than Batman, he committed to drawing nothing but Batman for the remainder of the semester. Even when the teacher told him he'd get gradually worse grades each time, he'd draw Batman. Pointillism Batman, abstract Batman, a gallery built out of spite and Batman. Ted got the idea, for some reason, of seeing how long he could go without sleep. He'd show up to school exhausted, totally out of his mind. You'd be talking to him, and he'd interrupt and ask if everything in the room, quote, looked like PlayStation graphics to everyone else. Ted loved movies. All kinds of movies, but especially action movies of the 80s and 90s. Ted was probably born in the right era for the kinds of movies he liked. Die Hard, The Rock, Con Air, lots of John Woo stuff, including the mostly forgotten The Big Hit. Me and Ted started a summer tradition around movies. We'd have what was called a food fest on the last day of summer, just to try and chase off those back-to-school blues. It started as a modest 4 or 5 movie affair and ballooned into a 48-hour movie marathon, during which we ate nothing but snack foods. Food so undernourishing that I remember eating a piece of chocolate cake during one, and my body reacted as though it was getting real, nutritious food. Me and Ted, McDonald's cash heavy-ish in our pockets, would go to the movies at least once a week that summer of 1998. Godzilla, The X-Files, The Mask of Zorro, Small Soldiers, Blade, Lethal Weapon 4, Saving Private Ryan, and Armageddon. One of the things about Ted is that he could be a little obsessive about things. When he was into something, he was all in. And when Ted decided he needed to see Armageddon in the theater as many times as possible, he took it seriously, and he eventually racked up a very impressive 18 screenings, just barely missing the big 2-0. I don't know what it was about Armageddon exactly that interested Ted, but here's my personal take. Armageddon was kind of the ultimate version of the thing it was. When I remember the big, dumb, said affectionately, action movies of the time, I think of explosions, tough guys, glamour shots of helicopters. Armageddon has Steve Buscemi shooting a gun in space. Why would they possibly have a gun in space? Why would that even exist, and why would you bring it? What possible purpose could it serve other than getting into the hands of a beloved character actor and causing havoc? Armageddon has more explosions than it knows what to do with. It has multiple separate sequences of smaller asteroids entering the atmosphere, becoming meteors and smashing into stuff, including appearing to kill an adorable Frenchie who was happily riding in the bicycle basket. And not to ruin it for you, but Lil Reggie is just fine. I still remember that dog's name. I haven't seen that movie for like 20 plus years. Armageddon is absolutely stacked with tough guys. Bruce Willis, the OG everyman turned tough guy. Michael Clark Duncan, Billy Bob Thornton, Keith David, William Fichtner, Ben Affleck, a tough guy in training who underwent about 40 hours of serious dental work for the part. The movie had everything an action movie needed, and it was one of the last of its kind. There have been bigger overall movie years since 1998. 1999 is often cited as the best movie year ever, but I don't know. 1998 is a strong contender. There were bigger movies than Armageddon in 98, thanks Titanic, but what came in the years immediately after 1998? What were the top summer blockbusters? 1999 was Star Wars Episode 1, of course. I remember as a kid of about 12 reading that there were actually 9 episodes in the Star Wars saga, and I thought, wow, How great would it be if there were 6 more of these great movies? Oh, young naive Pete. So innocent. So pure. 2000. Mission Impossible 2. Which is fine and all. I have a soft spot for it. Who couldn't, what with Limp Bizkit doing a take on the classic theme? But it's more a slick action movie, less a rough and tumble movie where there's a bar fight for absolutely no reason. 2001, Shrek. No shade on ogres, but Shrek does not occupy the same space as an Armageddon. 2002, Spider-Man. 2003, Finding Nemo. 2004, Shrek 2. We had Star Wars Episode 3, Pirates of the Caribbean, Spider-Man 3, The Dark Knight. All movies I'd watch again. Well, not Episode 3. I don't care what you apologists say. It sucks. But none of them are big, dumb action movies of the type Armageddon was. I don't know. I don't believe in fate or higher powers, but maybe Ted sensed something. Maybe deep down, Ted knew this was our last hurrah. So why not have that hurrah 18 times in the theater? I suppose it's high time to summarize the movie here, even though I cannot possibly imagine that even those of you who haven't seen it are unaware of the general plot. Bruce Willis, named Harry Stamper in this movie because an action hero always needs a name that sounds kind of like a real name and usually features an aggressive verb, runs a company that works offshore drilling for oil. His daughter, Liv Tyler, also works for the company, and she is in love with Ben Affleck, who is the younger guy on the crew. You can connect the dots and we get an early action sequence where Bruce Willis is chasing Affleck around on an oil rig, blasting away with a shotgun. It was the 90s. Barely, but still. We talk a lot of game these days about hostile work environments, but I have yet to experience my boss hunting me down with a shotgun. To my knowledge, my boss has never had a shotgun at work, although I guess a lot of library managers drive Subarus and there's plenty of trunk space for a hidden arsenal. This lighthearted murder attempt is interrupted when a helicopter shows up and Bruce Willis is whisked away to Washington, D.C., where he's told that there's a giant asteroid headed towards Earth, which will kill everything and everyone on the planet, and they need his expertise because the plan to prevent this is to blow up the asteroid. And in order to blow it up real good, we have to drill into it, place the bomb in the hole, and then blast it to bits. This year, 2025, I learned about Sentry. Sentry is NASA's system for tracking crap in space that might become crap that collides with the Earth. If you wanted something new to be stressed about, I highly recommend linking to the Sentry table, which shows the stuff that's most likely to hit the Earth, how big it is, and how bad an impact would be. You can even sort it by the different factors. For example, when I sort it by how likely it is that the object will hit the Earth, I get a little relief because the most likely strike, a 1 in 10 chance, won't even happen until 2095. There's a pretty good chance I won't be around for that. I ate popcorn at a good half of those Armageddon showings, and today I boast a 100% popcorn consumption rate at the movies. There are 2 asteroids that are going to be pretty close to Earth in 2026, but the odds of them missing us are 99.9962%. So while there's always a chance of a strike, the odds of that happening in 2026 are much lower than the odds of me dying some other way, so I should probably just drive a little more safely if I'm looking to better my chances of waking up to another day on this cruel planet. The closest I could find to an Armageddon asteroid is our old pal 2905 1950 DA. These asteroids don't have cool names, which is too bad. NASA, if you're looking for a guy with a penchant for coming up with goofy names, on my first date with my future wife, I came up with 100 cat names that started with the letter S. We're still together, by the way. Maybe because I did a super good job, maybe because she's very tolerant. Here's a brief list of names better than 29075 1950 DA. Planet Masher 5000, Crush Rock World Flattener, The Mangalorean, Daisy, and Super Rock Master Tama. 29075 1950 DA is set to come close to Earth in the year 2880, so we have a minute, but the big problem is that it's quite large, coming in at 1.3 kilometers in diameter. That's close to a mile across for those of you who don't use science measurements and instead prefer feet and inches and furlongs and dram-dom-da-da-dons or whatever. A mile across is, very big. It'd also hit us at a speed of 14.10 kilometers per second, which again, in vroom vroom terms, is about 32,000 miles per hour. A big thing moving very fast is no good. Anyway, now that I've not unlocked a new fear for you, back to the show. After Bruce Willis is appraised of the situation, he's introduced to a bunch of astronauts. And he quickly lets all them nerds know that he can't teach a lifetime of drilling experience to these dorks with the time crunch they're facing. He needs his guys, his team. Instead of training astronauts to drill, we have to train drillers to astronaut. One of the legendary aspects of Armageddon is that there's a very funny, possibly drunken commentary track in which Ben Affleck talks a lot of crap about this movie. Quote, "I asked Michael, director Michael Bay, why it was easier to train oil drillers to become astronauts than it was to train astronauts to become oil drillers. And he told me, shut the F up." So that was the end of that talk. Here are a few other nuggets from the same commentary. This is where you just have a random helicopter in the background for no real reason, just because you're a big movie and expensive and you can. You have no idea how much of a headache having a helicopter in the background causes us. Safety this and money that, only so many hours they can fly, they're on walkies, winds blasting everywhere. If I hadn't brought it up, you probably would have forgotten about that yellow helicopter in the background by now. Here's another. You ever notice how everyone in these movies, they always have to be the best? Bruce Willis is the best deep core driller. I didn't know they rated deep core drillers. You know what I mean? Like if you went around and asked somebody, who's the best deep core driller? How do you know? Who keeps track of these things? By the way, there's a separate commentary with Michael Bay in which he drops these gems. 1, I know there's no fire in space, but it's a movie and most people don't know that. And 2, my possibly favorite, I was very unimpressed when I went to NASA. I do want to take a moment to point out that while I mean no disrespect to Roughnecks, I have to believe that if we held a contest wherein astronauts had 1 week to learn the oil and gas business and Roughnecks had 1 week to learn how to go into space, well, I don't think it'd be hard to know which side to place my bet on. Again, no offense. I think an astronaut could learn my job a lot easier than I could learn theirs. And heck, even if they didn't do it perfectly, you have a C- newsletter column about a crappy movie where I'd crash a shuttle through someone's roof. Even if we all survive, that costs what, hundreds of millions? From here, the movie is still very fun to watch, but not fun to describe. We get training montages, we laugh about the various roughnecks going up in fighter jets and experiencing the G's. The roughnecks are all profiled and interviewed by doctors and psychologists in a very strange room that looks like something out of Beetlejuice. My favorite line in the movie, which is a total sleeper, is delivered by Ken Hudson Campbell. "I suffered a major head injury when I was in high school." Boom, just that. Camera cuts in, he delivers the line to the psychologist, and we're immediately out. It's a sequence that feels like it must have been a lot of fun for the writers. Just bang out like 50 different lines that express that these guys are in no condition to leave the only planet they've ever touched. We'll distribute them among the guys and we'll see what happens. And then we get the love scene in which Ben Affleck titillates Liv Tyler with an animal cracker while an Aerosmith song, a song sung by her dad, crescendos into the chorus of "I don't want to miss a thing." I want to be a better person, and I think being grateful for things is a good way to do that. I can't tell you how grateful I am that I never had to be in a movie where I was about to make sweet love and on the soundtrack, my dad was singing. I Don't Want to Miss a Thing is the song that would go on to be played at every high school dance I went to, which wasn't like a ton of them. I was not popular with the ladies, but I assume the song was probably played at all the other ones as well. I don't recall the DJ looking at me, shooting me a couple finger guns, and then putting this track on just for my sake. Much the way the movie Armageddon was the last of its kind, I pose that I Don't Want to Miss a Thing was the last truly big monster ballad. It was somewhere in Steven Tyler's head all through the 80s and most of the 90s, long after we'd tired of hearing about what percentage of roses had thorns and being asked what our price for flight was. How could we have known it at the time? Much like another power ballad told us, you don't know what you got till it's gone. This is the point where we get into the more serious portions of the movie, the more sincere parts. I mean, we blow up a space station somehow, we have to slingshot around the moon or something, which I don't understand but enjoy nonetheless, and then we land on the asteroid. The movie loses its way a bit here, I think mostly because our lovable group of expendables is split up. One of the two shuttles takes a lot of damage in trying to land, and it appears to be lost. The remaining dudes drill, it doesn't work out too great, but then it does. And Steve Buscemi comes down with the first recorded case of space dementia after he starts acting wildly and, I don't know, not being very helpful. Space dementia is a fictional disease. However, in the book Blue Blood by Edward Conlon, Conlon describes that during the time he worked with the NYPD, when you would call in sick, you would not just say you were sick, nor that you had a cold. You had to provide a named ailment. Officers were coached to say they had flu-like symptoms to satisfy this requirement, and Conlon, who thought the rule was silly, started using reasons like Dutch elm disease, which so far only affects elm trees and hasn't jumped to humans, and on one occasion, space dementia. Fake thing, real day off of work. We're nearing the end here. The Roughnecks successfully drill a big hole, and they're ready to blow up the asteroid, but of course, something is wrong, and someone has to stay behind and manually trigger the bomb, because of course that's what happens. Someone needing to stay behind and sacrifice themselves is so hard-coded into action movies that we barely even notice anymore. These days, someone will just be like, I'm going to stay here, hold them off, and the other characters just give a knowing nod like, yep, that seems like a good idea. We've been outfoxing the baddies this whole time, but this seems as good a time as any to completely change tacks and just stand here with some guns and shoot a lot and then get shot or possibly appear to be killed only to limp into frame once the movie is over. The Roughnecks draw straws, something the astronauts don't participate in because I guess it turns out that the Roughnecks could not learn to pilot a space shuttle in a week. Again, no shade on Roughnecks. I'd be hard-pressed to build a Lego space shuttle inside of a year. Ben Affleck draws the short straw. He's set to stay, but then Bruce Willis, while walking Affleck outside to his doom, destroys the air hose on Affleck's spacesuit, shoves him back in the spaceship, and takes over the grim duty of staying behind with the bomb. Readers, you've hung with me this far, so I'm not afraid to admit that as a young man, this sequence always brought a tear to my eyes, which were up to then pretty dry because Armageddon is 2 hours and 30 minutes long, and in the era before tablets and smartphones, our eyes were not screen time trained to stay moistened for that long. There's a brief sequence where Bruce Willis and Affleck are shouting things at each other, mostly things like, I love you, which is not something you really hear adult tough boys screaming at each other on the big screen. It was a touching moment between two men, the kind of overture you just didn't see all that often embedded in a movie that still had one really big explosion to go. When I saw Armageddon for the first time, I kind of expected Bruce Willis to survive somehow. I don't know, it's magical thinking, but it's thinking informed by these types of movies. The hero almost always has a moment where things look impossible, then something stupid happens and he's saved. I figured, I don't know, the bomb would blow Bruce Willis clear, he'd land on the shuttle's windshield, and they'd pull him into the shuttle just in time. Hey, I was like 15. It's not a realistic scenario, but it is realistic considering that this was a Bruce Willis-helmed movie, and it couldn't possibly end with his death, right? Right? Wrong. Willis definitely gets blowed up to pieces, and the other Roughnecks return home in an ending that's bittersweet, even though there's lots of slow motion running and hugging and kissing and a jet flyover that probably cost like $10 million. Me and Ted were friends for many, many years. In fact, after high school, we were roomies. It was my first apartment, a 2-bedroom we shared. It was pretty fun, too. I don't know for sure that he'd say that, but I would. We hung out a lot. We had beers, we walked around. After a blizzard, we walked to his work and we shoveled out a car driven by this girl Ted had a crush on. She assumed her boyfriend had done it, and her boyfriend just went ahead and accepted that credit. Even though he damn sure didn't shovel that car out. My soreness could attest to that fact. There was this one night, we were on the roof of a building, don't ask, and I didn't know where Ted was. Then I turned and saw him sprinting right along the edge of the building. It wasn't a building that was so high he would have died or anything. This was Greeley, after all. But I burst out laughing. To this day, it was the craziest thing I've ever just turned my head and seen someone doing. Ted decided to go to college, and I stayed in the apartment we shared a couple of years longer before I downgraded and moved into a smaller studio apartment because I work in public service, and the money is, I work in public service. And from there, I just didn't really see Ted anymore. I drove up to his college town to hang out with him once or twice, and then we just never really talked again. We're still connected through a vague web, the kind of thing where my mom runs into one of his siblings at the grocery store or whatever, so I know he's okay. He's certainly still alive, he has a home, seems like he's doing pretty good. But that's it. Armageddon was the last movie of its kind, and Ted was the last friend of that type I'd ever have. I haven't seen Armageddon in at least 20 years, but I still remember it. Seeing it 8 times in the theater will do that to a person. And I still think the ending is weird, almost out of place. Maybe just a little awkward to hear those tough boys screaming I love you at each other. It's probably equally weird to read it here, but love you, Ted. That's our newsletter for May, for the start of summer reading. So don't forget to sign up at mylibrary.us/SRA.